Welcome to Marple Parlor, where Miss Marple elegantly solves timeless mysteries.
In the shadowed halls of Ravenwood Grange, a scream pierces the night. Sir Reginald Ashbourne lies dead, poisoned, his priceless sapphire brooch vanished. Who among the elegant guests, his icy wife, his trembling daughter, the secretive doctor, or the cunning solicitor, wields a killer's hand? As whispers of blackmail and betrayal unravel, only Miss Jane Marple, with her keen eyes and little grey cells, can untangle the web of lies. Will she uncover the truth before the killer strikes again? Dive into the riddle of Ravenwood Grange, a chilling Agatha Christie-style mystery, where every clue counts and no secret stays buried. Chapter 1. The quiet of Ravenwood. The late autumn sun cast a feeble glow over Ravenwood Grange, a sprawling Elizabethan manor, nestled in the rolling hills of St. Mary Mead's outskirts. Its ivy-clad walls and mullioned windows exuded an air of timeless dignity, yet beneath its serene facade, a subtle unease stirred among its inhabitants. The estate belonged to Sir Reginald Ashbourne, a retired diplomat whose penchant for lavish gatherings was matched only by his fastidious attention to social propriety. This weekend, as golden leaves drifted across the manicured lawns, the Grange played host to a small but distinguished party, gathered to celebrate Sir Reginald's 60th birthday. Miss Jane Marple, a slight figure in a lavender tweed suit, sat quietly in the drawing-room, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically. She had been invited almost as an afterthought, a nod to her distant connection to Lady Ashbourne's late cousin. To the casual observer, Miss Marple was merely a genteel spinster, her sharp eyes hidden behind spectacles, her conversation confined to village gossip and gardening. Yet those who knew her better, or rather, those who underestimated her, would soon discover the keen intellect that lay beneath her unassuming exterior. The drawing-room was a study in opulence, polished oak panelling, a roaring fire, and a grand chandelier casting prismatic light across the gathered company. Sir Reginald, resplendent in a tailored dinner jacket, held court with a glass of sherry, his booming laugh filling the room. His wife, Lady Eleanor Ashbourne, a statuesque woman with an air of calculated elegance, presided over the guests with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. Their daughter Clara, a vivacious young woman of 25, flitted about, her laughter bright but tinged with a nervous edge. Among the guests were Dr. Leonard Grayson, a local physician with a weary demeanour, Mrs. Beatrice Langley, a widowed heiress with a penchant for dramatic gestures, and Major Percival Fortescue, a bluff military man whose ruddy complexion suggested a fondness for port. Rounding out the party was Mr. Victor Crane, a sleek London solicitor with an unsettlingly smooth manner, and Miss Sylvia Trent, a quiet young artist whose sketches adorned the Grange's guest rooms. Finally, there was Captain Arthur Hastings, Poirot's old friend, who had accompanied Miss Marple at Sir Reginald's insistence, his cheerful presence a counterpoint to her quiet observation. As the evening progressed, Miss Marple's needles paused occasionally, her eyes darting to catch a fleeting glance or a whispered aside. She noted the way Clara's hand trembled as she poured tea, the way Dr. Grayson avoided Lady Eleanor's gaze, and the way Mr. Crane's smile tightened when Sir Reginald mentioned a recent financial venture. The air was thick with unspoken tensions, as if the very walls of Ravenwood Grange held secrets too heavy to bear. Dinner was served at precisely 8 o'clock, a sumptuous affair of roast pheasant and claret. The conversation turned to Sir Reginald's latest acquisition, a rare sapphire brooch said to have belonged to a French countess. He displayed it with pride, pinning it to Lady Eleanor's gown, where it gleamed under the candlelight. "A treasure," he declared, "and a fitting gift for my dear Eleanor." Miss Marple's eyes lingered on the brooch, noting its intricate design, and the way Mrs. Langley's fingers twitched as she stared at it. As the clock struck 10, the party retired to the library for coffee and brandy. The room, lined with leather-bound volumes, was warm and inviting, yet Miss Marple sensed a shift in the atmosphere. Clara excused herself abruptly, claiming a headache, while Major Fortescue muttered something about needing air, and stepped onto the terrace. Miss Marple, sipping her coffee, watched as Lady Eleanor's fingers brushed the sapphire brooch, her expression unreadable. It was then that a scream pierced the night, sharp and chilling, from the direction of the east wing. The guests froze, their faces a tableau of shock. Hastings leapt to his feet, his military instincts kicking in. "Good heavens, what was that?" he exclaimed. Miss Marple set her knitting aside, her expression calm but alert. "I believe," she said softly, "that we are about to uncover something most unpleasant." The party rushed toward the source of the scream, their footsteps echoing through the darkened corridors of Ravenwood Grange. In the east wing, they found Clara, pale and trembling, standing over the lifeless body of Sir Reginald Ashbourne. His face was contorted in a grimace of pain. A glass of brandy spilled across the Persian rug beside him. The sapphire brooch was gone. Miss Marple knelt beside the body, her eyes scanning the scene with quiet precision. "Poison, I should think," she murmured, noting the faint bitter almond scent on Sir Reginald's lips. "And a very clever poisoner at that." The stage was set, the players assembled, and the mystery of Ravenwood Grange had begun. Chapter 2. The Shadow of Death. The library at Ravenwood Grange, so warm and inviting moments before, now seemed to close in around the stunned guests, its heavy oak shelves and flickering fire, casting long, accusatory shadows. Sir Reginald Ashbourne lay motionless on the Persian rug, his once vibrant face frozen in a rictus of agony. The spilled brandy glass glinted in the firelight, its contents seeping into the intricate weave of the carpet. Clara, still trembling, clung to the arm of Captain Hastings, her eyes wide with horror. The other guests hovered near the doorway, their faces a mixture of shock, fear, and something less definable, suspicion. Miss Jane Marple stood quietly to one side, her small figure almost lost in the chaos. Her hands were folded neatly, her knitting abandoned on a nearby table. But her eyes moved with relentless precision, taking in every detail. The position of Sir Reginald's body, the overturned glass, the faint scratches on the mahogany table beside him. She noted, too, the absence of the sapphire brooch, which had so recently adorned Lady Eleanor's gown. The air was thick with the acrid scent of fear. And something else, a faint chemical bitterness that lingered near the body. Lady Eleanor was the first to break the silence, her voice sharp despite its tremor. "This is monstrous! Who could have done such a thing?" She clutched her shawl, her eyes darting to the empty spot on her gown where the brooch had been pinned. Miss Marple's gaze followed, noting the faint tear in the silk where the jewel had been hastily removed. Dr. Leonard Grayson knelt beside the body, his physician's instincts overriding his shock. "He's gone," he said, his voice low. "No pulse, no breath. The symptoms, cyanosis, the contorted expression, suggest poison, likely administered recently." He glanced at the spilled glass, then at Miss Marple, as if seeking her confirmation. "Indeed, Doctor," Miss Marple said softly, her tone measured. "And a poison that acts swiftly, I should think. Prussic acid, perhaps?" Her question hung in the air, innocent yet pointed, and Dr. Grayson's face tightened almost imperceptibly. Captain Hastings, ever practical, took charge. "We must summon the police at once, and no one is to leave this room until we've secured the scene." He glanced at Miss Marple, his old friend, knowing her penchant for seeing what others missed. "Miss Marple, have you any thoughts?" Miss Marple's lips curved in a faint, enigmatic smile. "Only that we must be methodical, Captain Hastings. The truth lies in the details, and the details are all around us." She gestured subtly toward the room, her eyes lingering on the guests, each of whom seemed to shrink under her gaze. Mrs. Beatrice Langley, her face pale beneath her rouge, fanned herself vigorously. "This is dreadful! Poor Sir Reginald, and that brooch, stolen, no doubt, by some vile opportunist." Her voice carried a theatrical note, but Miss Marple noted the way her eyes flicked toward Mr. Victor Crane, the solicitor, who stood silently by the window, his expression unreadable. Major Percival Fortescue, red-faced and blustering, stepped forward. "Nonsense! This is no random theft. Someone in this house had a grudge against Ashbourne. Mark my words, it's personal." His accusation hung heavily, and Miss Marple observed the way Clara flinched at his words, her hands twisting in her skirt. Miss Sylvia Trent, the quiet artist, had said nothing since the discovery, her dark eyes fixed on the floor. Miss Marple noted her stillness, the way her fingers clutched a small sketchbook as if it were a lifeline. There was something in her silence, Miss Marple thought, that spoke louder than words. Hastings, meanwhile, had moved to the door, ensuring no one left. "We'll need statements from everyone," he declared. "Where were you all when the scream was heard? Let's establish a timeline." The guests exchanged uneasy glances, each reluctant to speak first. Lady Eleanor, recovering her composure, began. "I was in the drawing-room, speaking with Beatrice about the brooch. We heard Clara's scream and came at once." Mrs. Langley nodded vigorously. "Quite right. We were together the whole time." Dr. Grayson cleared his throat. "I was in the billiard-room, alone, reviewing some medical notes. I heard the scream and ran to the east wing." Major Fortescue snorted. "I was on the terrace, smoking a cigar. Heard the commotion and came inside. Didn't see a soul out there." Mr. Crane spoke next, his voice smooth as polished glass. "I was in the conservatory, admiring the orchids. The scream brought me here." Miss Sylvia Trent's voice was barely a whisper. "I was in my room sketching. I came down when I heard Clara." Clara, her voice breaking, added, "I was in the east wing, looking for father. I found him like this." She dissolved into sobs, and Hastings patted her arm awkwardly. Miss Marple listened, her mind cataloguing each alibi, each inflection. She noted the precision of Lady Eleanor's account, the defensiveness in Dr. Grayson's tone, the way Major Fortescue's bluster seemed to mask something deeper. She stepped closer to the body, her eyes catching a glint beneath the table, a single sapphire bead, no larger than a pinhead, half hidden in the rug's fringe. She said nothing, but her fingers brushed the bead, committing its presence to memory. As Hastings organized the guests to wait in the drawing room, Miss Marple lingered, her gaze sweeping the library. The clock on the mantel read 10:15 p.m. She noted the position of the brandy decanter, the smudge on the glass's rim, the faint scuff mark on the floor near the terrace door. Each detail was a thread in the tapestry of the crime, and Miss Marple's little grey cells were already weaving them together. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the windows of Ravenwood Grange. The police would arrive soon, but Miss Marple knew the truth would not wait. The killer was among them, and the game of cat and mouse had only just begun. Chapter 3. The Arrival of Inquiry. The wind howled through the ancient oaks surrounding Ravenwood Grange, carrying with it the distant wail of a police siren. The library, now a grim tableau of death, had been sealed off by Captain Hastings, who stood guard at the door with a soldier's resolve. The guests confined to the drawing room sat in uneasy silence, their faces illuminated by the flickering fire. Miss Jane Marple, her lavender tweed suit impeccable despite the hour, had resumed her knitting, the soft click of her needles a steady counterpoint to the tension in the room. To the untrained eye, she was merely a quaint old lady, but her sharp gaze missed nothing. The nervous twitch of Mrs. Langley's fan, the way Mr. Crane's fingers drummed silently on his knee, the faint tremor in Clara's clasped hands. The arrival of the police, led by Inspector Japp of Scotland Yard, brought a new energy to the Grange. Japp, a wiry man with a brisk manner and a moustache that seemed to bristle with authority, strode into the drawing-room, his notebook already open. "A bad business, this," he said, his eyes sweeping the assembled company. "Sir Reginald Ashbourne, poisoned, and a valuable brooch missing. We'll get to the bottom of it, mark my words." His gaze settled on Hastings, a familiar face from past cases. "Captain Hastings, what's all this about? And who's this?" He nodded toward Miss Marple, his tone sceptical. Hastings, ever loyal, stepped forward. "This is Miss Jane Marple, a friend and a most astute observer. She's been invaluable in other matters." Japp raised an eyebrow but said nothing, turning his attention to the guests. "Right then. I'll need statements from everyone, and no one leaves the Grange until we've sorted this out. Now, who found the body?" Clara's voice was barely audible. "I did, Inspector. I went to the East Wing to speak to Father and found him there." Her eyes filled with tears, and Miss Marple noted the way Lady Eleanor's hand tightened on her daughter's shoulder, a gesture that seemed more controlling than comforting. Japp scribbled in his notebook, "Time of death, Dr. Grayson." The physician, his face drawn, replied, "I'd estimate between 9:45 and 10 p.m., based on the body's condition. The poison, likely prussic acid, acts quickly, within minutes." Miss Marple's needles paused. "And the brandy glass, Inspector," she said softly, her voice cutting through the room's tension. "Have you examined it closely? The smudge on the rim, perhaps? Or the contents of the decanter?" Japp turned, surprised by her interjection. "We'll get to that, Miss Marple, is it? The forensic chaps are on their way. Now, let's have your alibis again, one by one." The guests repeated their stories, each account delivered with varying degrees of conviction. Lady Eleanor and Mrs. Langley reiterated their time together in the drawing room, their voices almost too synchronized. Dr. Grayson maintained he was alone in the billiard room, though Miss Marple noted his hesitation when pressed about the exact time. Major Fortescue's Terrace cigar was corroborated by the faint scent of tobacco on his jacket, but his bluster seemed to falter under Japp's scrutiny. Mr. Crane's conservatory alibi was vague, his smooth demeanour unruffled but curiously detached. Miss Sylvia Trent, still clutching her sketchbook, repeated her claim of sketching in her room, her voice so soft Japp had to lean forward to hear her. Miss Marple listened intently, her mind cataloguing discrepancies. She recalled the sapphire bead she had found beneath the library table, its presence a silent accusation. She had not mentioned it to Japp, preferring to hold her cards close until the pattern of the crime became clearer. Her eyes drifted to the terrace door, where a faint scuff mark on the threshold suggested someone had entered or exited in haste. The library's clock, she noted, had stopped at 10:02 p.m., a detail no one else seemed to have noticed. As Japp continued his questioning, Miss Marple excused herself to freshen up, a pretext that allowed her to slip into the East Wing corridor. The police had cordoned off the library, but the adjacent rooms were unguarded. She moved with quiet purpose, her eyes scanning the polished floorboards for further clues. Near the library door, she found a single petal, vibrant purple, likely from one of the orchids in the conservatory. It was an odd place for such a find, and Miss Marple tucked it into her handkerchief, her mind turning to Mr. Crane's alibi. Returning to the drawing-room, she found Japp concluding his initial interviews. "We'll need to search the premises," he announced. "That brooch is key. Either it's the motive or a distraction. And I want every glass, bottle, and decanter in that library tested." Miss Marple nodded approvingly, though her thoughts were elsewhere. She observed the way Clara avoided her mother's gaze, the way Dr. Grayson's hands fidgeted when the brandy decanter was mentioned, the way Major Fortescue's eyes darted to the terrace door. Each guest, she realized, was a piece in a complex puzzle, their secrets interlocking in ways they themselves might not yet understand. As the police began their search, Miss Marple resumed her knitting, her needles moving with deceptive calm. "The truth," she murmured to Hastings, who had taken a seat beside her, "is like a village gossip. It hides in plain sight, waiting for someone to notice its significance." Hastings frowned, puzzled. "You think you're on to something already, Miss Marple?" She smiled faintly, her eyes never leaving the guests. "Let us say, Captain, that I have observed certain inconsistencies. The little grey cells, they are already at work." Outside, the wind continued its mournful song, and the shadows of Ravenwood Grange grew deeper. The investigation had begun, but Miss Marple knew the real work lay in unravelling the human heart, a task for which she was uniquely suited. Chapter 4. The Art of Observation. The drawing-room at Ravenwood Grange was a study in strained civility as the clock ticked past midnight. The guests, confined under Inspector Japp's orders, sat in uneasy clusters, their earlier politeness fraying at the edges. The fire had dwindled to embers, casting a ruddy glow over faces that betrayed exhaustion, fear, and, in some cases, calculation. Miss Jane Marple, seated near the window with her knitting, appeared almost serene, her needles clicking rhythmically as her sharp eyes darted from one guest to another. Captain Hastings, ever her loyal confidant, hovered nearby, his brow furrowed with concern. Inspector Japp had retreated to the library with his constables to oversee the forensic examination, leaving the guests under the watchful eye of a young sergeant. Miss Marple, however, needed no such supervision to conduct her own investigation. Her method was quieter, subtler, rooted in the minute observations of human behaviour. She noted the way Lady Eleanor's fingers toyed with the torn silk of her gown, where the sapphire brooch had been pinned. She observed the faint sheen of perspiration on Dr. Grayson's forehead, despite the coolness of the room. And she watched Miss Sylvia Trent, whose sketchbook remained clutched to her chest like a shield, her eyes avoiding contact with anyone. "Captain Hastings," Miss Marple murmured, her voice low enough to escape the sergeant's notice. "Have you considered the significance of the stopped clock in the library?" Hastings blinked, caught off guard. "The clock? I assumed it had simply run down." Miss Marple's lips twitched in a faint smile. "Clocks, my dear Captain, do not run down at such convenient moments. That one stopped at 10:02 p.m., precisely when the crime was likely committed. A coincidence, perhaps, but I am not fond of coincidences." Before Hastings could respond, Japp re-entered the room, his expression grim. "Right then," he announced, clapping his hands to command attention. "The preliminary findings are in. The brandy in Sir Reginald's glass was laced with prussic acid, just as Dr. Grayson suspected. Death would have been near instantaneous. The decanter, however, is clean, no trace of poison. That means the poison was added to the glass itself, likely just before Sir Reginald drank." A murmur rippled through the guests. Mrs. Beatrice Langley gasped theatrically, her fan fluttering. "But who could have done such a thing? We were all together." "Not quite," Japp said sharply. "By your own accounts, several of you were alone at the critical time. Now, I'll need to know exactly who had access to that glass." Miss Marple's needles paused as she spoke, her voice gentle but clear. "Inspector, might I suggest you examine the smudge on the glass's rim? It may tell us whether the poison was added by someone wearing gloves, or perhaps someone careless enough to leave." A trace Japp shot her a curious look, but nodded. "Noted, Miss Marple. We're testing for prints now, but I'll have you know, this is a police matter." "Of course, Inspector," she replied demurely, though her eyes gleamed with quiet amusement. Japp turned to the group, his tone brisk. "Let's go through your movements again, focusing on the library. Who was in there before the scream?" Lady Eleanor spoke first, her voice steady. "I was in the library earlier, around 9:30, to fetch a book for Beatrice. Sir Reginald was there, reading. I left him alone." Dr. Grayson cleared his throat. "I passed through the library around 9:40, on my way to the billiard room. Sir Reginald was alive, sipping his brandy." Major Fortescue, his face flushed, added, "I looked in briefly after my cigar, around 9:50. He was at his desk writing something." "Didn't speak to him?" Mr. Victor Crane's voice was smooth as ever. "I never entered the library after dinner. I was in the conservatory until the scream." Miss Sylvia Trent hesitated, then whispered, "I was in my room all evening. I didn't go near the library." Clara, her voice trembling, said, "I went to find Father just before 10. He was already dead when I arrived." Miss Marple listened, her mind sifting through the alibis like a seamstress sorting threads. She recalled the purple orchid petal she had found near the library door, a detail that pointed to the conservatory and to Mr. Crane, whose alibi seemed almost too polished. She also considered the sapphire bead, still tucked in her handkerchief, and the stopped clock, which suggested someone had tampered with the scene. As Japp pressed the guests for more details, Miss Marple rose quietly and approached Clara, who sat alone by the fire, her face pale. "My dear," Miss Marple said kindly, "you mentioned finding your father just before 10. Did you notice anything unusual in the library? A sound, perhaps, or an object out of place?" Clara's eyes widened, and she hesitated. I don't know. It all happened so fast, but I think I heard a rustle, like someone moving quickly, just before I entered. And the clock, it was ticking when I went in, I'm sure of it." Miss Marple nodded, her expression unreadable. "Thank you, my dear. Every detail helps." Returning to her seat, she resumed her knitting, her thoughts racing. The rustle Clara described suggested someone had fled the library moments before her arrival, someone who might have stopped the clock to obscure the exact time of death. The smudge on the glass, the missing brooch, the orchid petal, all were pieces of a puzzle that Miss Marple's little grey cells were beginning to assemble. As the sergeant ushered the guests to their rooms under strict instructions not to leave, Miss Marple caught Hastings's eye. "Captain," she murmured, "we are dealing with a mind that is both bold and meticulous. But even the cleverest criminal leaves a trail if one knows where to look." Hastings frowned, sensing the weight of her words. "You think you're close to solving this, Miss Marple?" She smiled faintly, her needles clicking once more. "Not close, Captain, but I am beginning to see the shape of the truth, and it is a most intriguing shape indeed." Outside, the wind battered the windows of Ravenwood Grange, as if urging the secrets within to spill forth. Miss Marple's investigation had only just begun, but the threads of deceit were already unravelling. Chapter 5. The Red Herrings. The dawn broke over Ravenwood Grange with a pale, reluctant light, filtering through the heavy drapes of the drawing room where the guests had reconvened under Inspector Japp's watchful eye. The air was thick with fatigue and suspicion, the events of the previous night weighing heavily on the assembled company. Miss Jane Marple sat in her usual corner, her knitting a quiet metronome amidst the tension, her eyes as sharp as ever. Captain Hastings, pacing near the fireplace, cast occasional glances her way, sensing that her placid demeanour masked a mind in ceaseless motion. Inspector Japp, fortified by a strong cup of tea, stood at the centre of the room, his notebook bristling with notes. "We've made progress," he announced, his voice cutting through the murmurs. The forensic lads confirmed the brandy glass held traces of prussic acid, applied directly to the rim. No fingerprints, though. Wiped clean, likely with a cloth. The sapphire brooch is still missing, and we've searched every room save the private quarters, which we'll tackle today. His gaze swept the group, lingering on Major Fortescue, whose ruddy face seemed to darken under scrutiny. "It's obvious, isn't it?" Major Fortescue blustered, his voice loud enough to startle Mrs. Langley, who dropped her fan. "That solicitor chap Crane. He's got shifty eyes, always skulking about, isn't he? And he was in the conservatory, close enough to slip into the library unnoticed." Mr. Victor Crane's expression remained impassive, though his lips tightened slightly. "I assure you, Major, I was admiring the orchids as I said. I had no reason to harm Sir Reginald, nor to steal his wife's bauble." "Bauble?" Lady Eleanor snapped, her composure fraying. "That brooch was worth a fortune. and you, sir, have a reputation for handling delicate financial matters." The accusation hung in the air, and Miss Marple's needles paused as she observed the ripple of reactions. Clara's sharp intake of breath, Dr. Grayson's averted gaze, Miss Sylvia Trent's fingers tightening on her sketchbook. The Major's outburst, she thought, was a classic red herring, loud, obvious, and designed to divert attention. But from what? Or whom? Japp raised a hand for silence. "Enough speculation. We've found something else in the library, a scrap of paper under Sir Reginald's desk, partially burned. It reads, 'Debts must be paid. Midnight.' Sounds like a threat to me. Anyone care to explain?" The guests exchanged uneasy glances, but no one spoke. Miss Marple, however, recalled the Major's claim of seeing Sir Reginald writing at his desk around 9:50 p.m. Had he been drafting a response to this note? Or was it planted to mislead? She made a mental note to examine the fireplace in the library, where the rest of the paper might have been burned. As Japp pressed the group for details about their financial ties to Sir Reginald, Miss Marple slipped away under the pretense of fetching a shawl. Her real destination was the conservatory, where Mr. Crane claimed to have been at the time of the murder. The glass-walled room was a jungle of exotic plants, their heavy scents mingling with the damp earth. She moved carefully, her eyes scanning the floor. Near a cluster of purple orchids, she found what she sought. A faint footprint in the soil, small and narrow, not the size of Mr. Crane's polished shoes. A woman's shoe, perhaps? She crouched, noting the pattern. A delicate heel, possibly Clara's or Miss Trent's. Returning to the drawing-room, Miss Marple found Japp interrogating Dr. Grayson about his medical bag, which contained a vial of prussic acid for laboratory use. "It's standard for my work," the doctor protested, his voice strained. "I keep it locked away. No one could have accessed it." "Locked, you say?" Japp's tone was skeptical. "We'll check that lock, Doctor. And your alibi, alone in the billiard room, doesn't hold much water." Miss Marple, resuming her seat, murmured to Hastings, "The doctor is nervous, Captain, but not, I think, about his vial. There is something else he fears we will discover." Her eyes drifted to Clara, whose pale face and red-rimmed eyes suggested more than grief. Guilt, perhaps, or fear of exposure? As the morning wore on, Japp's focus on Dr. Grayson and Mr. Crane intensified, their alibis dissected with relentless precision. The Major's accusation and the burned note had shifted suspicion, but Miss Marple remained unconvinced. Red herrings, she knew, were the killer's favourite tool, designed to obscure the truth with noise and misdirection. She thought of the sapphire bead, the stopped clock, the orchid petal, and now the footprint. Each was a clue, small but significant, pointing to a truth that lay just beneath the surface. "Captain Hastings," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "we must pay attention to what is not said. The silences in this house are louder than the accusations." Hastings nodded, though his expression betrayed his confusion. "You think Grayson's hiding something? Or Crane?" Miss Marple's smile was enigmatic. "I think, Captain, that everyone is hiding something. The question is, whose secret is worth killing for?" As Japp announced a break for lunch, Miss Marple's gaze lingered on Miss Sylvia Trent, whose silence throughout the morning had been almost as telling as the Major's bluster. The sketchbook, she thought, might hold more than drawings. The threads of the mystery were beginning to weave together, and Miss Marple's little grey cells were working tirelessly to unravel the pattern. Outside, the autumn wind rattled the windows, as if echoing the unease within Ravenwood Grange. The investigation was deepening, but the truth remained elusive, hidden in the shadows of human deceit. Chapter 6. A Clue in Detail. The afternoon light filtered weakly through the leaded windows of Ravenwood Grange, casting intricate patterns on the drawing-room floor. The guests, still under Inspector Japp's strict supervision, had been permitted a brief lunch. Though the meal was a sombre affair, marked by terse exchanges and furtive glances. Miss Jane Marple, seated near a bay window with her knitting, appeared absorbed in her work, but her eyes were as alert as ever, cataloguing the subtle shifts in the room's atmosphere. Captain Hastings, restless as always, leaned against the mantel, his gaze flickering between the guests and his old friend, whose calm demeanour belied the intensity of her thoughts. Inspector Japp, having concluded his morning interrogations, returned with fresh determination. "We've searched the private quarters," he announced, his voice sharp. "No sign of the sapphire brooch, but we did find this." He held up a small crumpled envelope, its edges singed as if it had been partially burned. It was in the fireplace in Sir Reginald's study, next to the library. Addressed to Clara. No sender's name. Inside there's nothing but a single line. "Meet me at midnight." Same handwriting as the burned note we found earlier. Clara Ashbourne gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "I never saw that note. I swear it, Inspector." Lady Eleanor's eyes narrowed, her voice icy. "Clara, what is this nonsense? Were you planning a clandestine meeting with someone?" "No, Mother, I wasn't." Clara's voice cracked, her eyes darting to Miss Marple as if seeking rescue. The old lady's expression remained serene, but her needles paused and she tilted her head slightly, as if weighing Clara's distress against some unseen scale. Miss Marple's mind was already turning over the new clue. The singed envelope, the cryptic note, the stopped clock at 10:02 p.m., all pointed to a carefully orchestrated crime, one designed to mislead. She recalled the small footprint in the conservatory, too delicate for Mr. Crane's shoes, and the purple orchid petal near the library door. These details, combined with the sapphire bead she had found, were beginning to form a pattern, though the full picture remained tantalizingly out of reach. Japp, meanwhile, turned his attention to Miss Sylvia Trent, who had remained almost invisible throughout the morning. "Miss Trent," he said, his tone brisk, "you've been awfully quiet. You claim you were sketching in your room all evening, but no one can corroborate that. Care to show us this sketchbook of yours?" Sylvia's fingers tightened on the leather-bound book, her face paling. "It's private," she murmured. "Just drawings, nothing more. Private or not, it's evidence now," Japp said, extending his hand. Reluctantly, Sylvia handed over the sketchbook, her eyes fixed on the floor. Japp flipped through the pages, revealing delicate pencil sketches of the Grange's gardens, portraits of the guests, and intricate studies of flowers. But one page caught Miss Marple's eye as Japp turned it. A detailed drawing of the sapphire brooch, rendered with almost obsessive precision. The sketch included annotations, 1.5 carats, French setting, circa 1780. Miss Marple's eyebrows rose slightly. How had a quiet artist like Sylvia come to know such specifics about the brooch? "Interesting," Japp said, holding up the page. "Care to explain this, Miss Trent?" Sylvia's voice was barely audible. I admired the brooch at dinner. I sketched it from memory. It's what I do. Capture beautiful things." Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm, but her mind was racing. The sketch was too precise for a mere memory, suggesting Sylvia had studied the brooch closely, perhaps closer than anyone realized. Had she been in the library when the brooch was taken? Or was her sketch another red herring, designed to distract? As Jap pressed Sylvia for more details, Miss Marple's attention shifted to Dr. Grayson, who had grown increasingly agitated during the exchange. His fingers fidgeted with his cufflinks, and his eyes darted toward the door. She recalled his claim about the locked medical bag and the prussic acid it contained. A doctor, she thought, would know exactly how to administer such a poison, and how to wipe a glass clean of prints. "Inspector," Miss Marple said softly, her voice cutting through the tension. "Might I suggest you examine the fireplace in the study more closely? If the envelope was partially burned, there may be other fragments that could clarify the note's purpose." Jap nodded, though his expression suggested he was growing weary of her suggestions. "We'll get to it, Miss Marple, but first I want to know about these debts Sir Reginald was involved in. Mr. Crane, you were his solicitor. What can you tell us?" Crane's smile was as smooth as ever. "Sir Reginald's finances were complex, Inspector, but sound. He had investments in several ventures, some riskier than others. I handled the paperwork, nothing more." Miss Marple noted the way Crane's eyes avoided Clara's, and she recalled the young woman's mention of a rustle in the library just before she found her father. Could Crane have been there, despite his conservatory alibi? Or was someone else moving in the shadows? As the questioning continued, Miss Marple slipped away once more, this time to the study, adjacent to the library. The room was small, lined with books and papers, and smelled faintly of ash. She knelt by the fireplace, her fingers sifting through the cinders. There, buried in the ash, she found a tiny fragment of paper, no larger than a postage stamp, with a single word, "Repay." It was enough to confirm her suspicion. The note was no idle threat, but part of a larger web of motives. Returning to the drawing room, Miss Marple resumed her knitting, her mind piecing together the clues: the stopped clock, the sapphire bead, the orchid petal, the footprint, the singed envelope, and now the word "repay." Each was a thread in the tapestry of the crime, and she was beginning to see the outline of a cunning mind at work. "Captain Hastings," she murmured, her voice barely audible, "the killer is playing a game of misdirection, but they have made one mistake. They have underestimated the power of observation." Hastings leaned closer, his voice low. "You're on to something, aren't you? Who do you suspect?" Miss Marple's smile was enigmatic. "Suspect, Captain? I do not suspect, I observe. And what I observe is that the truth is closer than we think." The afternoon wore on, and the shadows in Ravenwood Grange grew longer, mirroring the deepening mystery. Miss Marple's little grey cells were working tirelessly, and the pattern of the crime was slowly coming into focus. Chapter 7. The Lies Unravel. The air in Ravenwood Grange grew heavier as the afternoon waned, the oppressive weight of suspicion settling over the guests like a fog. The drawing room, once a haven of civility, now felt like a stage where each player concealed their true role. Miss Jane Marple sat by the window, her knitting needles moving with their usual precision, but her eyes were restless, darting from face to face, seeking the cracks in their carefully constructed facades. Captain Hastings, seated nearby, fidgeted with his watch, his unease palpable as he watched Inspector Japp pace the room, his notebook now a dog-eared testament to the case's complexity. Japp, his patience fraying, addressed the group with a scowl. "We're getting nowhere with these alibis," he said, his voice sharp. "Someone in this room knows more than they're letting on." The burned note, the missing brooch, the poisoned glass. It all points to a plan, and I'm betting one of you is at the heart of it. His gaze settled on Clara Ashbourne, whose pale face and trembling hands made her an easy target. "Miss Ashbourne, that note addressed to you, 'Meet me at midnight.' What were you hiding from your father?" Clara's eyes widened, and she shook her head vehemently. "I told you, Inspector, I never saw that note. I don't know who sent it or why." Her voice broke, and she buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. Lady Eleanor stepped forward, her expression a mask of icy control. "Inspector, my daughter is distraught. You cannot seriously believe she had anything to do with this tragedy." Miss Marple's needles paused, her gaze softening as she watched Clara. The girl's distress was genuine, she thought, but there was something else. A flicker of fear, not just of accusation, but of something deeper, something she dared not voice. Miss Marple's mind returned to the singed envelope and the word repay she had found in the study's fireplace. Debts, she mused, were not always financial. Emotional debts, betrayals, promises broken. These were the currencies of murder. As Japp pressed Clara further, Miss Marple's attention shifted to Mrs. Beatrice Langley, whose theatrical demeanour had grown more subdued since the morning. The widow's fan lay still in her lap, and her eyes, usually bright with gossip, were fixed on Dr. Grayson with an intensity that bordered on accusation. Miss Marple recalled the doctor's agitation when his medical bag was mentioned, and the faint tremor in his voice when questioned about his alibi. There was a connection there, she thought, a thread linking the doctor to the widow, and perhaps to Sir Reginald's death. "Inspector," Miss Marple said softly, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife through silk. "Might I suggest we consider the relationships between our guests? Sir Reginald was a man of influence, and influence breeds both loyalty and resentment. Perhaps we should ask about any personal connections that may have soured." Japp frowned, but the suggestion struck a chord. He turned to Mrs. Langley. "You were close to Sir Reginald, weren't you, Mrs. Langley? Rumour has it you invested heavily in one of his ventures, a venture that went sour." Mrs. Langley's face flushed, her composure slipping. "That's preposterous. Yes, I invested in Reginald's shipping company, but it was profitable. He assured me of it." Her voice faltered, and she glanced at Dr. Grayson, who looked away quickly. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly. The widow's outburst had revealed more than intended. A financial motive was emerging, one that might explain the note about debts. She made a mental note to inquire further about Sir Reginald's business dealings, perhaps through Mr. Crane, whose smooth demeanour suggested he knew more than he let on. As Japp shifted his focus to Dr. Grayson, Miss Marple excused herself under the pretence of needing air. She slipped into the corridor, her steps light but purposeful, and made her way to Miss Sylvia Trent's room. The young artist's sketchbook had piqued her curiosity, particularly the detailed drawing of the sapphire brooch. With the door slightly ajar, Miss Marple knocked softly and entered, finding Sylvia seated at a small desk, her sketchbook open to a new page. "Miss Trent," Miss Marple said kindly, I couldn't help but admire your sketches. The brooch, in particular. It's remarkable how well you captured its details. Almost as if you had studied it closely. Sylvia's hands froze, her pencil hovering over the page. I told the inspector. I drew it from memory. I have a good eye for such things. Miss Marple nodded, her smile disarming. Of course, my dear, but tell me, did you ever speak to Sir Reginald about the brooch? Perhaps he shared its history with you? Sylvia's eyes flickered with something, fear perhaps, or guilt. He mentioned it was a family heirloom. He was proud of it, that's all. Her voice was barely a whisper, and she quickly closed the sketchbook. Miss Marple did not press further, but as she left the room, she noticed a small smear of purple paint on Sylvia's sleeve, a shade remarkably similar to the orchid petal found near the library. The clue was subtle, but to Miss Marple it was as loud as a shout. Sylvia had been in the conservatory, or near it, despite her claim of staying in her room. Returning to the drawing-room, Miss Marple found Japp grilling Major Fortescue about his financial ties to Sir Reginald. You borrowed a tidy sum from him last year, didn't you? Japp said, his tone accusatory. And you've yet to repay it? The Major's face reddened. That's a private matter. Reginald and I were old friends. He didn't press me for repayment. Miss Marple's mind whirred. The Major's debt, Mrs. Langley's investment, Sylvia's sketch, Dr. Grayson's nervousness, all were threads in a tangled web. And at the centre, she suspected, was a motive far more personal than money. Captain Hastings, she murmured, leaning close. The lies are beginning to unravel, but the truth is still hidden. We must watch for the moment when someone's guard slips completely. Hastings nodded, his eyes wide. You think it's one of them, don't you? But who? Miss Marple's smile was faint but knowing. Patience, Captain. The little grey cells are piecing it together, and soon we shall see the whole picture. As the wind howled outside, the secrets of Ravenwood Grange grew ever more precarious, teetering on the edge of exposure. Chapter 8. The Emotional Turning Point. The atmosphere in Ravenwood Grange had grown stifling by late afternoon, the weight of suspicion and grief pressing down on the guests like a storm cloud ready to burst. The drawing-room, with its fading light and heavy drapes, seemed to mirror the darkening mood of its occupants. Miss Jane Marple sat in her usual corner, her knitting needles moving with mechanical precision, but her eyes were alive with quiet intensity, observing the subtle cracks in the guest's composure. Captain Hastings, ever her faithful shadow, stood by the fireplace, his face etched with concern as he watched the drama unfold. Inspector Japp, his patience worn thin, had gathered the guests once more, his voice sharp with frustration. We're no closer to finding that brooch, and the poisoner's still among us, he declared, his moustache twitching with irritation. Someone's lying, and I'm tired of the games. Miss Ashbourne, let's start with you. That note, meet me at midnight. You're telling me you knew nothing about it? Clara, her face pale and her eyes red from crying, shook her head vehemently. I swear, Inspector, I never saw it. I don't know who wrote it or why. Her voice cracked, and she clutched her mother's hand, though Lady Eleanor's grip seemed more possessive than comforting. Miss Marple's needles paused, her gaze softening as she studied Clara. The girl's distress was palpable, but there was something beneath it, a desperation that suggested she was hiding more than just grief. Miss Marple's mind flickered to the clues she had gathered. The sapphire bead, the orchid petal, the stopped clock, the footprint in the conservatory, and the singed note with the word repay. Each pointed to a web of motives. But it was the human heart, she knew, that would reveal the truth. Before Japp could press further, Mrs. Beatrice Langley, who'd been unusually subdued, rose from her chair, her face flushed with emotion. "This is intolerable," she cried, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and anguish. "You're all looking at me as if I'm the villain, but I loved Reginald. He was more than a friend. He was everything to me." Her words dissolved into a sob, and she collapsed back into her chair, her fan falling to the floor. The room fell silent, the guests stunned by her outburst. Dr. Grayson, who had been fidgeting with his cufflinks, froze, his face ashen. Lady Eleanor's lips tightened into a thin line, her eyes blazing with something akin to contempt. Mr. Victor Crane's smooth demeanour faltered for a moment, his fingers pausing mid-drum on his knee. Even Major Fortescue, usually quick with a blustering retort, seemed at a loss for words. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly. Mrs. Langley's confession was a turning point, a crack in the facade that revealed the raw emotions simmering beneath the surface. Love, she thought, was a powerful motive, perhaps as powerful as greed or revenge. She recalled the widow's intense gaze at Dr. Grayson earlier, and the doctor's discomfort when his medical bag was mentioned. There was a connection there, one that might explain the poison and the missing brooch. Japp seized the moment, his voice gentler but no less probing. "Mrs. Langley, are you saying you and Sir Reginald were involved? And did anyone else know about this?" Mrs. Langley wiped her eyes, her voice unsteady. "It wasn't like that. Not an affair, not really. We were close, years ago, before he married Eleanor. But recently, he confided in me about his troubles. Financial troubles, family troubles. He was under such strain." She glanced at Lady Eleanor, then quickly away. "I didn't tell anyone. I couldn't." Lady Eleanor's voice was cold as steel. "You're lying, Beatrice. Reginald would never have confided in you. You were always chasing after him, desperate for his attention." The accusation sparked a fresh wave of tension, and Clara, unable to bear it, leapt to her feet. "Stop it, Mother! Stop it! Father was unhappy, and you know it. He told me things about the business, about debts, about someone threatening him." Her voice broke, and she fled the room, her sobs echoing down the corridor. Miss Marple's needles stilled entirely, her mind racing. Clara's outburst was the emotional breach she had been waiting for, a moment when the truth, or part of it, slipped through the cracks. The mention of threats aligned with the singed note and the word repay, but Clara's distress suggested she knew more than she had revealed. Was she protecting someone, or was she afraid of being exposed? Japp, momentarily thrown by Clara's exit, turned to Hastings. "Captain, go after her. Make sure she's all right, and keep her in sight." Hastings nodded and hurried out, leaving Miss Marple to observe the remaining guests. She noted the way Dr. Grayson's hands trembled as he reached for his tea, the way Miss Sylvia Trent's eyes followed Clara's departure with a flicker of something, guilt perhaps, or fear. Mr. Crane, meanwhile, had regained his composure, his smile as smooth as ever, though Miss Marple detected a faint strain in it. "Inspector," Miss Marple said softly, rising from her chair, "I wonder if we might examine Miss Trent's sketchbook again. There may be more to her drawings than we first thought." Japp frowned but nodded, retrieving the sketchbook from his satchel. He flipped to the page with the sapphire brooch, then paused at another sketch, a rough outline of the library, complete with the desk, the brandy decanter, and a figure standing near the terrace door. The figure was indistinct, but the details of the room were precise. down to the stopped clock at 10:02 p.m. "Miss Trent," Japp said, his voice sharp. "When did you draw this?" Sylvia's face paled, her hands twisting in her lap. I sketched it after dinner from memory. I like to capture scenes, moments. I didn't mean anything by it." Miss Marple's smile was gentle, but probing. "A remarkable memory, my dear. To capture the clock at precisely 10:02, almost as if you were there when it stopped." Sylvia's eyes widened, and for a moment she seemed on the verge of speaking. But she clamped her lips shut, her fingers tightening on her skirt. Miss Marple returned to her seat, her mind weaving the new clue into the tapestry of the crime. The sketch, the footprint, the petal, the note, all were threads, and Mrs. Langley's confession had loosened a knot in the pattern. The truth was closer now, but it was still veiled in the complexities of human emotion. As the wind howled outside, Miss Marple murmured to herself, "The heart betrays what the mind conceals." And in this house, the heart is speaking loudly. The investigation was reaching a critical juncture, and Miss Marple's little grey cells were poised to unravel the next layer of the mystery. Chapter 9. The Trap. The evening shadows lengthened across Ravenwood Grange, casting the drawing-room in a sombre twilight that seemed to mirror the growing tension among the guests. The fire had been stoked anew, but its warmth did little to dispel the chill of suspicion that hung in the air. Miss Jane Marple sat in her accustomed corner, her knitting needles moving with deliberate calm, though her eyes were sharp, missing nothing. Captain Hastings had returned from checking on Clara, his face grim as he whispered to Miss Marple that the young woman was resting but deeply shaken. Inspector Japp, his energy undiminished despite the long day, paced before the guests, his notebook now a tattered chronicle of their secrets and evasions. Miss Marple had sensed the moment was ripe for a bolder move, a trap to coax the truth from the tangled web of lies. She had observed the guests closely. Mrs. Langley's emotional outburst, Clara's desperate denials, Sylvia's cryptic sketch, Dr. Grayson's nervous tics, and Mr. Crane's polished detachment. Each clue, the sapphire bead, the orchid petal, the stopped clock, the singed note, the conservatory footprint, and now the library sketch, pointed to a carefully planned crime. But the killer's identity remained elusive. It was time, she decided, to apply a little psychological pressure. "Inspector," Miss Marple said, her voice soft but carrying the weight of authority, "might I suggest we gather everyone in the library? There is something about the scene of the crime that may yet speak to us if we listen carefully." Japp paused, his moustache twitching with curiosity. "The library, eh? We've gone over it with a fine-tooth comb, Miss Marple, but I suppose it couldn't hurt." "Right, everyone, up you get. We're reconvening where Sir Reginald met his end." The guests, weary and apprehensive, followed Japp's orders, filing into the library with reluctance. The room was much as it had been the night before. The Persian rug still bore the faint stain of spilled brandy. The desk was cluttered with Sir Reginald's papers, and the stopped clock on the mantel remained frozen at 10:02 p.m. Miss Marple positioned herself near the terrace door, her eyes lingering on the faint scuff marks she had noted earlier. The sapphire bead still tucked in her handkerchief weighed heavily in her thoughts. Japp stood by the desk, addressing the group. "Now, let's go over this one more time. Sir Reginald was poisoned with prussic acid, applied to his brandy glass. The brooch is missing, and we've got a note suggesting a midnight rendezvous that never happened. Someone in this room knows more than they're saying. Miss Marple, you've got something in mind. Let's hear it." Miss Marple rose, her small figure commanding the room's attention despite her unassuming air. "Thank you, Inspector. I have observed that in a crime such as this, the truth often hides in the smallest details. Details that seem insignificant until they are placed in context. Let us consider the clock, for instance." She gestured to the mantel. "It stopped at 10:02 p.m., precisely when Clara heard a rustle and found her father dead. But clocks do not stop of their own accord, do they?" The guests shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting to the clock. Major Fortescue cleared his throat. "It's an old house. Clocks fail all the time." "Perhaps," Miss Marple said, her tone mild but her gaze piercing. "But let us also consider the brandy glass. The smudge on the rim suggests it was wiped clean, yet the poison was applied directly to the glass. This tells us the killer was meticulous, but not infallible. And then there is the sapphire brooch, which vanished so conveniently. I wonder," she paused, her eyes sweeping the room, "if the brooch was not the motive, but a distraction." Lady Eleanor's face tightened, her hand brushing the torn silk of her gown. "A distraction? That's absurd. The brooch was priceless." Miss Marple nodded, as if conceding the point. "Indeed, Lady Eleanor. But let us imagine for a moment that the brooch was taken to draw our attention away from the true reason for Sir Reginald's death. A reason rooted, perhaps, in the secrets he kept. Secrets about debts, promises, or betrayals." Her voice grew softer, almost hypnotic. "I have found, in my experience, that the heart often betrays what the mind seeks to conceal." The room was silent, the guests frozen under her gaze. Dr. Grayson's hands trembled visibly, and Miss Sylvia Trent's fingers clutched her sketchbook as if it were a lifeline. Mr. Crane's smile faltered, and Mrs. Langley's eyes filled with tears. Clara, standing near her mother, looked as though she might faint. Miss Marple stepped toward the terrace door, her movements deliberate. "And then there is this door," she said, running her finger along the threshold. "A scuff mark, a petal from the conservatory, a footprint too small for a man's shoe. These suggest someone moved quickly, perhaps to escape the library, just before Clara arrived. But who?" She turned, her eyes locking onto Sylvia Trent. "Miss Trent, your sketch of the library is remarkably detailed. The clock, the decanter, the figure by the terrace door. Almost as if you saw the scene unfold. Would you care to tell us what you really saw that night?" Sylvia's face drained of colour, her voice a whisper. I didn't see anything. I told you, I was sketching in my room." Miss Marple's smile was gentle, but relentless. "And yet, my dear, your sleeve bears a smear of purple paint, the same shade as the orchids in the conservatory. And your sketchbook tells a story your words do not." Sylvia's hands shook, and the sketchbook slipped from her grasp, falling open to the library sketch. The room erupted in murmurs, and Japp pounced, retrieving the book. "This is evidence, Miss Trent. You'd better start talking." Sylvia's eyes filled with tears, and she sank into a chair, her voice breaking. "I didn't kill him, I swear it, but I saw something. I was in the conservatory, not my room. I lied because I was afraid. I saw someone slip out of the library through the terrace door, just before Clara screamed. I didn't see their face, but they were carrying something small, glinting in the moonlight. Miss Marple nodded, her trap sprung. Sylvia's admission had shifted the narrative, narrowing the field of suspects. The killer was among them, and the net was tightening. "Captain Hastings," she murmured, as the guests dispersed under Japp's orders. "The truth is emerging, but it is not yet complete. We must be ready for what comes next." Hastings, his eyes wide, whispered, "You're closing in, aren't you?" Miss Marple's smile was enigmatic. "The little grey cells, Captain, are never idle, and now they are very close indeed." The wind outside howled, as if echoing the turmoil within Ravenwood Grange. The trap had been set, and the killer's mask was beginning to slip. Chapter 10. The Reveal. The library at Ravenwood Grange was a theatre of shadows as the evening deepened, the flickering firelight casting eerie patterns on the oak-panelled walls. The guests, summoned once more by Inspector Japp, stood or sat in a tense semicircle, their faces pale and strained under the weight of the unfolding mystery. Miss Jane Marple, her lavender tweed suit as immaculate as ever, stood near the stopped clock on the mantel, her knitting folded neatly in her bag. Her eyes, sharp and unrelenting, moved from one guest to another, as if peeling back the layers of their carefully guarded secrets. Captain Hastings, by her side, sensed the gravity of the moment, his usual restlessness replaced by a quiet anticipation. Inspector Japp, his notebook tucked away, addressed the group with a grim determination. "We've danced around the truth long enough," he said, his voice resonant in the silent room. Sir Reginald Ashbourne was poisoned, his sapphire brooch stolen, and someone in this room is responsible. Miss Marple, you've been dropping hints all day. Care to share what your little grey cells have pieced together?" Miss Marple's lips curved in a faint, almost apologetic smile. "Thank you, Inspector. It is true that the truth has been elusive, hidden behind a veil of misdirection and half-truths. But the clues, as always, tell their own story, if one listens carefully." She stepped forward, her small figure commanding the room's attention. "Let us reconstruct the events of that fateful night, step by step, and see where they lead us." She began, her voice clear and measured. Sir Reginald was poisoned with prussic acid, applied to the rim of his brandy glass, sometime between 9:45 and 10:02 p.m., when the clock was stopped. Deliberately, I believe, to obscure the exact time of death. The sapphire brooch, so proudly displayed, was taken, but not, I think, as the primary motive. It was a distraction, meant to muddy the waters. The guests shifted uneasily, their eyes darting to one another. Miss Marple continued, her gaze settling on the terrace door. "We have a scuff mark here, a purple orchid petal found nearby, and a small footprint in the conservatory, suggesting someone moved swiftly from the library to the conservatory just before Clara's scream. Miss Trent's sketch of the library, with its precise details, confirms she saw more than she admitted. She saw someone leave through this door, carrying something that glinted. Likely the brooch." Sylvia Trent, her face pale, nodded faintly. "I told you, I didn't see their face. It was dark and I was afraid." Miss Marple nodded, her expression kind but unrelenting. "Indeed, my dear, but your fear has helped us, for it narrows the possibilities. Let us consider the other clues. The singed note addressed to Clara, with the words 'Meet me at midnight' and 'Repay' found in the ashes. The stopped clock, the smudge on the glass, wiped clean of prints, and the sapphire bead I found beneath the table, torn from Lady Eleanor's gown." Lady Eleanor stiffened, her hand brushing the torn silk. "That proves nothing, Miss Marple. The brooch was stolen from me." "Perhaps," Miss Marple said softly, "but let us examine the motives. Sir Reginald was a man of influence, with debts, financial and emotional, owed to many in this room. Major Fortescue owed him money, a debt he could not repay. Mrs. Langley, you spoke of a past closeness, a love unfulfilled, and a failed investment that strained your finances. Dr. Grayson, your medical bag contained the very poison used, and your nervousness suggests a secret you fear to reveal. Mr. Crane, as Sir Reginald's solicitor, you knew of his financial troubles, perhaps more than you've admitted. And Clara, your distress hints at a truth you cannot yet voice." The room was silent, the guests frozen under her scrutiny. Miss Marple's voice grew softer, almost hypnotic. "But there is one person whose actions align with every clue. One person who had the opportunity, the motive, and the cunning to orchestrate this crime." She turned to Dr. Grayson, whose face had gone ashen. "Doctor, you were in the library at 9:40 by your own admission, and you had access to prussic acid. Your medical bag, you said, was locked, but a doctor would know how to administer poison without leaving a trace. You were seen leaving the library by Miss Trent, through the terrace door, carrying something that glinted. The brooch, which you took to cast suspicion elsewhere. The footprint in the conservatory, though small, could belong to a man with narrow feet, such as yourself, and the note, 'Repay,' points to a debt not of money, but of honor." Dr. Grayson's hands trembled, his voice hoarse. "This is outrageous. I had no reason to kill Reginald." Miss Marple's eyes softened, but her tone was firm. "Oh, but you did, Doctor. Mrs. Langley's confession revealed your secret. You and she were lovers, were you not? Years ago, before Sir Reginald married Eleanor, he broke your engagement by revealing your financial ruin to Mrs. Langley's family, ensuring she would not marry you. You never forgave him, and when you learned of his failing investments, through Mr. Crane perhaps, you saw a chance for revenge. You poisoned the glass, took the brooch to implicate Lady Eleanor, and stopped the clock to confuse the timeline. The note to Clara was a final touch, to suggest a family dispute." Mrs. Langley gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Leonard, is this true?" Dr. Grayson's shoulders slumped, his face crumpling. I couldn't let him ruin me again. He was going to expose my debts, ruin my practice. I had to stop him." Japp stepped forward, his handcuffs at the ready. "That's enough, Grayson. You're under arrest for the murder of Sir Reginald Ashbourne." As the doctor was led away, the room erupted in murmurs, the guests stunned by the revelation. Clara sobbed quietly, and Lady Eleanor's face was a mask of cold fury. Miss Marple returned to her seat, her expression serene but tinged with sadness. Hastings leaned close, his voice low. "You did it, Miss Marple. You saw what no one else could." She shook her head slightly. "The clues were there, Captain, for anyone who looked. The human heart, it always betrays itself in the end." The fire crackled, and the wind outside seemed to sigh in relief, as if Ravenwood Grange itself had exhaled a long-held secret. The truth was out, but the scars of betrayal would linger. Chapter 11. The Reflection. The library at Ravenwood Grange was silent once more, save for the soft crackle of the fire and the distant howl of the autumn wind. Dr. Leonard Grayson had been escorted away by Inspector Japp and his constables. the clink of handcuffs a stark reminder of the justice that had been served. The remaining guests sat in a stunned hush, their faces a tapestry of relief, guilt, and lingering unease. Miss Jane Marple, her lavender tweed suit as pristine as ever, had resumed her seat by the window, her knitting retrieved from her bag. Her needles moved with quiet precision, but her eyes, still sharp, lingered on the faces of those around her, as if ensuring no final secret remained hidden. Captain Hastings, seated beside her, leaned close, his voice low with admiration. "Miss Marple, you've done it again. I don't know how you saw through it all. The brooch, the note, the footprint. It was like watching a puzzle come together in an instant." Miss Marple's lips curved in a faint, wistful smile. "It is never an instant, Captain Hastings. The truth is like a tapestry, woven from many threads, each small but essential. One must only observe the pattern and trust the little grey cells to do their work." She paused, her needles slowing as she gazed out at the darkening grounds of the Grange. "Dr. Grayson's crime was born of a wounded heart, you see. Betrayal, even one from years past, can fester until it consumes all reason. Sir Reginald, for all his charm, was not a man without enemies. His actions, his interference in Dr. Grayson's love for Mrs. Langley, his financial pressures, sowed the seeds of his own destruction." Hastings nodded, though his brow furrowed. "But the brooch, Miss Marple, why take it? And the note to Clara? It all seemed so theatrical." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled with a touch of amusement. "Theatrical, yes, but deliberate. The brooch was a misdirection, meant to cast suspicion on Lady Eleanor, whose coldness made her an easy target. As for the note, it was a cruel touch, designed to implicate Clara and deepen the family's discord. Dr. Grayson was clever, but his bitterness betrayed him. He could not resist adding flourishes to his crime, and those flourishes were his undoing." She gestured subtly toward the terrace door, where the scuff mark and orchid petal had first caught her attention. "The smallest details, Captain, are often the loudest. A footprint too small for a man's shoe, yet fitting for Dr. Grayson's narrow feet. A petal from the conservatory, where he claimed never to have been. A clock stopped not by chance, but by design. These were the threads that led me to him." The room remained quiet, the guests processing the weight of the revelation. Lady Eleanor sat rigidly, her face a mask of controlled grief, though Miss Marple noted the faint tremble in her hands. Clara, still pale, clutched her mother's arm, her earlier sobs replaced by a weary resignation. Mrs. Beatrice Langley, her eyes red from crying, stared into the fire, as if grappling with the truth of her past with Dr. Grayson. Mr. Victor Crane, his smooth demeanour intact, offered a polite nod to Miss Marple, as if acknowledging her victory. Major Fortescue, his bluster subdued, muttered something about needing a drink. Miss Sylvia Trent, her sketchbook now in Japp's possession, sat quietly, her silence no longer one of concealment, but of relief. Inspector Japp re-entered the room, his expression a mix of exhaustion and grudging respect. "Well, Miss Marple, I'll hand it to you. You've got a knack for this. Grayson's confessed to everything. The poison, the brooch, the note. We found the brooch hidden in his medical bag, wrapped in a handkerchief. Seems he planned to sell it later, once the dust settled." Miss Marple inclined her head, her voice gentle. "Thank you, Inspector. It is a sad business, but justice has been served. I only hope the family may find some peace now." Jab snorted softly. "Peace? In this house? They'll be licking their wounds for years." He paused, then added, "You've got a sharp mind, Miss Marple. Ever thought of joining the force?" Her smile was serene, but firm. "Oh no, Inspector. I'm quite content in St. Mary Mead, where the village gossip provides puzzles enough, but I am glad to have been of assistance." As the guests were dismissed to their rooms, Miss Marple gathered her knitting and rose, her small figure a beacon of quiet strength. Hastings followed her to the corridor, his voice low. "What now, Miss Marple? Back to the village?" She nodded, her eyes distant but content. "Indeed, Captain. But first, a cup of tea, I think. There is nothing like a good cup of tea to restore order after such a storm." As they stepped into the chilly evening air, the wind seemed to soften, as if Ravenwood Grange itself were exhaling a long-held breath. The mystery was solved, the killer unmasked, but Miss Marple knew that the human heart would always hold new puzzles, waiting for her keen observation to unravel them. With a final glance at the shadowed manor, she walked away, her mind already turning to the quiet simplicities of St. Mary Mead. Chapter 12. The Echoes of Truth. The morning after Dr. Grayson's confession dawned cold and clear over Ravenwood Grange, the golden light of autumn filtering through the manor's ancient windows. The oppressive weight of suspicion had lifted, replaced by a sombre air of resolution. Yet the scars of the previous days lingered in the guests' drawn faces and guarded glances. Miss Jane Marple sat in the dining room, sipping a cup of tea, her knitting bag at her side. Her lavender tweed suit was as impeccable as ever, but her eyes carried a quiet melancholy, as if reflecting on the cost of the truth she had uncovered. Captain Hastings, seated across from her, stirred his coffee absently, his usual vigour tempered by the gravity of the case's conclusion. The other guests were present, though their interactions were strained. Lady Eleanor, her composure brittle, presided over the breakfast table with a forced dignity, her eyes avoiding Mrs. Beatrice Langley, who sat in silence, her usual theatricality subdued. Clara, pale but composed, picked at her toast, her gaze flickering toward Miss Marple with a mix of gratitude and lingering fear. Mr. Victor Crane, his smooth demeanour restored, made polite conversation about the weather, while Major Fortescue grumbled about the inconvenience of police inquiries. Miss Sylvia Trent, her sketchbook now returned to her, sketched quietly in a corner, her pencil moving with a newfound freedom. Inspector Japp entered the room, his brisk manner softened by the case's resolution. "Morning all," he said, nodding to Miss Marple. "I've just come from questioning Grayson further. He's confirmed every detail. Poison in the brandy glass, the brooch taken to frame Lady Eleanor, the note to Clara to sow confusion. He even admitted to stopping the clock to muddle the timeline. A thorough job, Miss Marple, spotting all of that." Miss Marple inclined her head, her smile gentle. "It was merely a matter of observation, Inspector. The clues were there, waiting to be seen. The sapphire bead, the orchid petal, the footprint, the stopped clock. Each was a piece of the puzzle, and Dr. Grayson, for all his cunning, could not hide them all." Hastings leaned forward, his voice low. "But what about the note, Miss Marple? The one about Repay and the midnight meeting. Was that just to throw us off?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly. "Not entirely, Captain. The note was a calculated move, rooted in Dr. Grayson's bitterness. He knew of Sir Reginald's strained relationship with Clara, her rebellious spirit, her arguments with her father over his control. By addressing the note to her, he hoped to cast suspicion on her, or at least to deepen the family's turmoil. It was a cruel touch, but it revealed his motive: revenge, not just for past betrayals, but for the life he felt Sir Reginald had stolen from him. Lady Eleanor, overhearing, spoke up, her voice sharp but unsteady. "And what of my brooch? Was it truly just a distraction?" Miss Marple turned to her, her tone kind but firm. "Indeed, Lady Eleanor. The brooch was a convenient scapegoat, taken to suggest theft as the motive. But its true purpose was to point suspicion towards you, whose coldness made you an easy target. Dr. Grayson knew the household dynamics well, perhaps too well." Mrs. Langley, her voice trembling, broke her silence. "I still can't believe Leonard would do this. He was so gentle once. How could he harbour such hatred?" Miss Marple's expression softened. "The human heart, Mrs. Langley, is a complex thing. A wound inflicted years ago can fester, turning love to resentment and resentment to vengeance. Dr. Grayson's love for you was real, but so was his pain when Sir Reginald destroyed it. That pain drove him to act, and in doing so, he betrayed himself." Clara, her voice barely audible, spoke up. "Father wasn't perfect. He could be harsh, controlling, but he didn't deserve this." Her eyes met Miss Marple's, filled with a quiet plea. "Thank you, Miss Marple, for finding the truth." Miss Marple nodded, her gaze warm. "You are welcome, my dear. The truth is often painful, but it is the only path to healing." As breakfast concluded, Japp announced that the guests were free to leave, though statements might be required later. The group dispersed, some to pack, others to linger in the Grange's sombre halls. Miss Marple and Hastings stepped onto the terrace, the crisp air a welcome contrast to the stifling atmosphere within. Hastings, lighting a cigarette, turned to her. "You know, Miss Marple, I thought I'd seen it all, but you've a way of seeing straight to the heart of things. What made you so sure it was Grayson?" Miss Marple gazed across the lawns, her voice reflective. "It was not certainty, Captain, but a process of elimination. The clues pointed to someone with access to the poison, knowledge of the household, and a motive rooted in personal betrayal. Dr. Grayson's nervousness, his connection to Mrs. Langley, the footprint that matched his narrow shoes, all aligned. But it was his eyes, Captain, that betrayed him. The eyes always tell the truth, even when the lips do not." Hastings shook his head, marvelling. "You're a marvel, Miss Marple. What's next? Another mystery in St. Mary Mead?" She smiled, her eyes distant. "Perhaps. The world is full of puzzles, and human nature never changes. But for now, I shall return to my garden and my knitting. There is much to be learned from the simple things, you know." As they walked back to the Grange to gather their belongings, the wind carried the faint rustle of leaves, a reminder of the secrets that had unravelled within its walls. Ravenwood Grange would heal in time, but its echoes of truth would linger, a testament to Miss Marple's quiet genius. Chapter 13. The unseen threads. The pale morning sun cast long shadows across the grounds of Ravenwood Grange, its light doing little to warm the lingering chill of the manor's halls. The guests, now free to depart, moved about with a subdued air, their bags packed and their farewells curt, as if eager to escape the memories of the past few days. Miss Jane Marple, however, lingered in the dining room, her tea cooling untouched before her. her knitting bag resting on the table. Her lavender tweed suit remained impeccable, but her eyes held a quiet intensity, as if she were still sifting through the threads of the mystery, ensuring no detail had been overlooked. Captain Hastings, ever her loyal companion, stood by the window, gazing out at the frost-tipped lawns, his thoughts still tangled in the intricacies of the case. Inspector Japp had left earlier that morning, escorting Dr. Grayson to the local station, where the doctor would face formal charges. The sapphire brooch, recovered from Grayson's medical bag, had been returned to Lady Eleanor, though she wore it now with a reluctance that suggested its beauty was forever tainted. The other guests, Mrs. Beatrice Langley, Mr. Victor Crane, Major Percival Fortescue, and Miss Sylvia Trent, had retreated to their rooms or prepared to leave, each grappling with the revelations that had shaken the fragile bonds of their circle. Miss Marple, however, was not entirely satisfied. Though Dr. Grayson's confession had tied together the major clues, the poisoned brandy glass, the stolen brooch, the stopped clock, the singed note, her keen mind sensed an unfinished thread, a subtle discord in the pattern of the crime. She sipped her tea, her thoughts returning to Clara Ashbourne, whose grief had seemed genuine, but layered with an unspoken fear. There was something in the young woman's demeanour, Miss Marple thought, that suggested she knew more than she had revealed, even after Grayson's arrest. Hastings turned from the window, his voice low. "Miss Marple, you've solved the case, haven't you? Grayson's confessed, the brooch is found, and the police are satisfied. Yet you seem unsettled. Is there something we've missed?" Miss Marple's needles, which she had resumed knitting, paused briefly. "You are perceptive, Captain. The case appears solved, and Dr. Grayson's guilt is certain. Yet there is a shadow, a small inconsistency that troubles me. It is like a stitch dropped in a pattern. One hardly notices it, but it weakens the whole." Hastings frowned, intrigued. What sort of inconsistency? The clues all pointed to Grayson, the footprint, the petal, the note. Miss Marple nodded, her eyes distant. Indeed they did. But consider Clara's behaviour. Her distress was real, yet it carried a weight beyond grief for her father. And the note, "Meet me at midnight." Why address it to her, if Grayson's aim was to frame Lady Eleanor? It feels personal, as if it were meant to draw Clara into the web. Before Hastings could respond, Clara entered the dining room, her face pale but composed. She hesitated, then approached Miss Marple, her hands twisting nervously. "Miss Marple, may I speak with you, privately?" Miss Marple set her knitting aside, her expression kind but alert. "Of course, my dear. Shall we step into the conservatory? The air there is quite refreshing." Hastings, sensing the importance of the moment, remained behind as Miss Marple and Clara walked to the glass-walled conservatory, where the scent of orchids hung heavy in the air. Clara closed the door behind them, her voice trembling as she spoke. "Miss Marple, I haven't been entirely honest. There's something I didn't tell the inspector, or anyone." Miss Marple's eyes softened, encouraging her to continue. "Go on, my dear. The truth is always better spoken, no matter how painful." Clara took a deep breath, her eyes filling with tears. "Father, he was in trouble, not just with money, but with something else. He told me, a week ago, that someone was blackmailing him. He wouldn't say who, but he was afraid, really afraid. The night he died, I was supposed to meet him in the library at 10, not midnight. I think the note was meant to lure me there, to make it look like I was involved. Miss Marple's mind raced, the pieces shifting into a new configuration. And did you go to the library, Clara? Clara nodded, her voice barely audible. Yes, but I was late. I got there just after 10 and he was already gone. I heard the rustle, like someone running away, and then I screamed. I was so afraid I didn't tell anyone about the meeting. I thought they'd think I did it. Miss Marple's hand rested gently on Clara's arm. You did well to tell me now, my dear. This changes things, but only slightly. Dr. Grayson's guilt remains, but the blackmail, that is a thread we must follow. Returning to the dining room, Miss Marple found Hastings waiting, his curiosity piqued. She recounted Clara's confession in a low voice, her eyes narrowing as she considered the implications. Blackmail, Captain, suggests another layer to this crime. Dr. Grayson acted alone in the murder, I am certain, but someone else may have known of his plans, or even encouraged them. Hastings's eyes widened. You think there's an accomplice? Not an accomplice, perhaps, Miss Marple said, her voice thoughtful, but someone who saw an opportunity in Sir Reginald's death. The note, the blackmail, these point to a mind that thrives on secrets. And I suspect that mind belongs to someone still among us. As the guests began to depart, Miss Marple's gaze settled on Mr. Victor Crane, whose smooth demeanour had never faltered, even under Japp's scrutiny. His role as Sir Reginald's solicitor gave him access to the family's secrets, and his presence in the conservatory placed him near the scene of the crime. The orchid petal, she thought, might yet have more to say. Captain, she murmured, we must keep our eyes open. The main puzzle is solved, but the unseen threads of this case may yet lead us to a deeper truth. The wind outside whispered through the oaks, as if urging Miss Marple to follow the final strands of the mystery. Ravenwood Grange was quiet once more, but its secrets were not yet fully laid to rest. Chapter 14. The Hidden Hand. The late morning sun bathed Ravenwood Grange in a deceptive calm, its golden rays glinting off the frost-kissed lawns, as if to erase the shadows of the past few days. Inside, the manor was nearly empty, the guests having begun their departures, their farewells marked by strained politeness and hurried steps. Miss Jane Marple remained in the drawing-room, her tea long gone cold, her knitting needles silent in her lap. Her lavender tweed suit was as pristine as ever, but her eyes held a restless glint, as if chasing an elusive thread in the tapestry of the crime. Captain Hastings, pacing near the fireplace, sensed her unease, his own thoughts clouded by the lingering questions Clara's confession had raised. Dr. Grayson's arrest had resolved the murder of Sir Reginald Ashbourne, but Clara's revelation about blackmail had opened a new avenue of inquiry. Miss Marple's mind was alive with the possibilities, sifting through the clues, the sapphire bead, the orchid petal, the stopped clock, the singed note, the conservatory footprint, and now the spectre of a blackmailer who had preyed on Sir Reginald's fears. The pieces fit Dr. Grayson's guilt, yet the blackmail suggested a deeper layer, a hidden hand manipulating events from the shadows. Captain Hastings, Miss Marple said softly, her voice cutting through the quiet, we have solved the murder, but I fear we have not yet uncovered the full truth. Clara's mention of blackmail points to someone who knew Sir Reginald's secrets. Someone who stood to gain from his fear, and perhaps from his death. Hastings stopped pacing, his brow furrowed. But Grayson confessed, Miss Marple. He admitted to the poison, the brooch, everything. Could there be someone else involved? An accomplice, maybe? Miss Marple shook her head, her expression thoughtful. Not an accomplice, Captain, but a catalyst. Someone who stirred the pot, knowing Dr. Grayson's bitterness would boil over. The note to Clara, "Meet me at midnight," was a clever touch, but its purpose was not just to mislead. It was a taunt, a way to ensure Clara was near the scene, perhaps to deepen her distress, or to cast suspicion on her. Only someone intimate with the household's dynamics could devise such a plan. Her gaze drifted to the corridor, where Mr. Victor Crane was preparing to leave, his sleek suitcase in hand. The solicitor's smooth demeanour had never wavered, even under Japp's relentless questioning, and his alibi, admiring orchids in the conservatory, had been vague but unchallenged. Miss Marple recalled the purple orchid petal near the library door and the footprint in the conservatory soil, which, while small, could belong to a man with narrow feet, like Crane's polished shoes. "Captain," she murmured, "I think it is time we had a word with Mr. Crane before he departs. There is a question I must ask, and I suspect his answer will be most illuminating." Hastings nodded, and they approached Crane as he stood in the entrance hall, adjusting his scarf with meticulous care. "Mr. Crane," Miss Marple said, her voice gentle but firm, "a moment, if you please. I'm curious about Sir Reginald's financial affairs. As his solicitor, you were privy to his dealings, his investments, his debts, perhaps even his fears. Did he ever mention being blackmailed?" Crane's smile was as polished as ever, but Miss Marple noted a fleeting tension in his eyes. "Blackmail, Miss Marple? That's a serious accusation. Sir Reginald was a cautious man, but he never spoke of such a thing to me. My role was purely professional, managing his accounts, nothing more." Miss Marple's smile was disarming, but her gaze was unrelenting. "Of course, Mr. Crane. But you were in the conservatory that night, were you not? Near the library, where a petal from an orchid was found, and a footprint that might match your rather elegant shoes. And as a solicitor, you would know the value of information, secrets that could be leveraged for gain." Crane's smile faltered, his fingers tightening on his suitcase. "I assure you, Miss Marple, I was merely admiring the flowers. I had no part in Sir Reginald's death." "Perhaps not directly," Miss Marple said softly, "but information is a powerful weapon. If you knew of Dr. Grayson's grudge, or of Sir Reginald's troubles, you might have seen an opportunity to profit, by planting a seed, perhaps, or by writing a note to stir the waters." Crane's face hardened, but before he could respond, Clara appeared in the hall, her expression one of sudden resolve. "Miss Marple," she said, her voice trembling but clear, "I found something in Father's study this morning. It was hidden in his desk, a letter, unsigned, demanding payment for silence about a failed venture. It mentioned Dr. Grayson's name." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed with quiet triumph. "Thank you, Clara. That is most helpful. Mr. Crane, would you care to explain this letter?" Crane's composure cracked, his voice sharp. "This is absurd. I know nothing of any letter." But Miss Marple's gaze held him fast. The petal, the footprint, the note to Clara, and now this letter, all point to someone who knew too much. "You were in a position to exploit Sir Reginald's fears, Mr. Crane, and perhaps to nudge Dr. Grayson toward his fatal act. Not a murderer, but a puppet master, pulling strings from the shadows. Crane's shoulders slumped, his defiance fading. I may have known about Grayson's past with Reginald. I might have suggested he confront him, but I didn't know he'd kill him. I only wanted leverage, a way to secure my fees. Miss Marple nodded, her expression tinged with sadness. The human heart, Mr. Crane, is easily swayed by greed. Your actions set this tragedy in motion, even if you did not strike the fatal blow. Hastings, wide-eyed, turned to Miss Marple. Shall we call Jap back? She shook her head. Not yet, Captain. Mr. Crane's confession is enough for now. Let him carry the weight of his conscience. The law will decide his fate in time. As Crane left, his steps heavy, Miss Marple returned to the drawing room, her mind at peace but her heart heavy. The unseen threads of the crime had been woven into the light, revealing a truth as complex as it was tragic. Chapter 15, The Quiet Departure. The sun hung low over Ravenwood Grange, its fading light casting long shadows across the manicured lawns and ancient oaks. The manor, once vibrant with the chatter of guests, now stood in a hush, as if mourning the secrets it had yielded. Miss Jane Marple stood in the entrance hall, her lavender tweed suit as neat as ever, her knitting bag slung over her arm. Her eyes, sharp yet softened by a touch of melancholy, lingered on the grand staircase, where the echoes of the past days seemed to linger. Captain Hastings beside her adjusted his hat, his face a mix of relief and lingering wonder at the unravelling of the mystery. The guests had all departed, their farewells curt and heavy with unspoken regrets. Lady Eleanor and Clara had retreated to their rooms, grappling with the dual blows of Sir Reginald's death and the revelations of betrayal. Mrs. Beatrice Langley, her theatrical flair dimmed, had left for London, her heart burdened by her past with Dr. Grayson. Major Percival Fortescue, blustering to the last, had muttered about returning to his club, while Miss Sylvia Trent, her sketchbook tucked under her arm, had slipped away quietly, her silence no longer a shield but a mark of introspection. Mr. Victor Crane, his smooth facade cracked by Miss Marple's probing, had left under a cloud, his role as the hidden hand in Sir Reginald's downfall, a weight he would carry alone, for now. Inspector Japp had telephoned earlier, confirming that Dr. Grayson's confession was airtight, and the evidence, the poisoned glass, the recovered brooch, the singed note, would ensure his conviction. Crane's involvement, though not criminal, would be noted, and Japp promised to keep an eye on the solicitor's future dealings. "You've got a devil of a mind, Miss Marple," Japp had said, his voice gruff with respect. "We'd have been chasing shadows without you." Miss Marple, preparing to leave, stood with Hastings by the front door. The crisp autumn air, a welcome contrast to the stifling atmosphere of the Grange. "Captain," she said, her voice soft but clear, "it is a curious thing, is it not? How the smallest threads can unravel the grandest schemes. A petal, a footprint, a word, they seem so trivial, yet they speak volumes when woven together." Hastings nodded, his eyes warm with admiration. "You saw it all, Miss Marple. The blackmail, Crane's scheming, Grayson's revenge. I don't know how you do it. It's like you see into people's souls." She smiled, a faint, wistful curve of her lips. "Not their souls, Captain, but their habits. Human nature is predictable in its way. We all leave traces, of our fears, our desires, our betrayals. It is only a matter of looking closely and listening to what is not said. Hastings glanced back at the manor, its ivy-clad walls looming in the twilight. "Do you think the Ashbournes will recover? Clara, especially. She seems so broken." Miss Marple's gaze softened. "In time, perhaps. Clara is young, and youth is resilient, but the wounds of this house run deep. Lady Eleanor's pride, Sir Reginald's secrets, the betrayals, they will leave scars. Yet scars, too, can teach us wisdom if we let them." As they walked toward the waiting car, Miss Marple paused, her eyes catching a single purple orchid petal on the gravel path, likely blown from the conservatory. She bent to pick it up, turning it over in her fingers. "A reminder," she murmured, "that even the smallest clue can lead to the truth." Hastings chuckled, shaking his head. "You'll be finding clues in your garden next, Miss Marple. What's waiting for you in St. Mary Mead?" She tucked the petal into her handkerchief, her smile enigmatic. "Oh, Captain, there is always a puzzle in St. Mary Mead. A neighbour's quarrel, a whispered rumour, a misplaced letter. The world is full of mysteries, and I shall be content to unravel them, one stitch at a time." The car rolled away from Ravenwood Grange, its tyres crunching on the gravel, leaving the manor to its quiet ghosts. Miss Marple gazed out the window, her mind already turning to the simplicities of her village, where the rhythms of life were as complex as any murder. The riddle of Ravenwood was solved, but the human heart, she knew, would always weave new enigmas, waiting for her little grey cells to unravel. As the Grange faded into the distance, the wind whispered through the oaks, carrying away the last echoes of a tragedy laid bare. Miss Marple closed her eyes, content in the knowledge that truth, however painful, was always worth seeking.